Hi everyone, my name is Wafa Alghatam. I am the Director of Urban and Housing Lab at University of Bahrain. Today, my presentation will be about the generic structure of urban villages and their social implications by using space syntax approach. During the growth of cities, villages are frequently absorbed into the fabric of such expansions. But what are the consequences of this? What is the effect on the village and what is the effect in the wider city? These questions are addressed through an in-depth review of the cases of two closely related Bahraini cities of Manama and Muharraq, found in the late 18th century. The region in which these two cities came into existence originally contained up to 80 villages. The two cities experienced rapid urban expansions, which gradually engulfed villages in their vicinity, but the process of absorption does not seem to have been uniform. At one extreme, the villages seem to constitute a part of the structure of the city, and at the other extreme, they appeared to stand apart from the city and remaining more or less separated entities. These noticeable spatial differences are also reflected in social differentiation. This presentation set out to investigate the critical spatial characteristic in the way the urban villages are embedded in the urban context. It is an attempt to explore the configurations of the village's space and review the vital spatial properties of the layout and their social implications. The intention is to try to answer three of the key theoretical questions raised from the literature review. How is urban villages layout related to the city? Are there any significant differences between them? Does the configurations of the village within the surrounding context play a role in their social development? The theory and the methodology for this research is using space syntax theory and methodology. It is a tool to think with the urban village space structure as well as their social development. I will begin here by introducing space syntax briefly. The first idea, as determined in analytical space syntax theory between space and society, describes the generic mechanism through which we call it foreground network and background network puts its prints on the configurations of urban space. What is Hilliard's theory saying about the generic structures? It is the idea that the urban grid is made up of two interlocking grids, each of with its own metric and geometrical properties. A foreground grid structure by serving microeconomics, or let's say microeconomics movement, and the background grid structured by social cultural factors and serving mainly for residents. The two being linked by a pattern of centers. These different spatial structures generate a fundamental differences in social network, which in the foreground grid serve the need for the microeconomic movement, and in the background grid the need for stability. The relationships of the microeconomics and the social cultural stability is what define the village is for, and it is both reflected in and created by the dual form of the generic city of background and foreground network. A three keys outcome permit us to see the villages as social process are the following: the generic structure of the village, the intelligibility of the village space within the surrounding context, and the village space function. Space syntax is a science-based human-focused approach that investigates relationships between spatial layout and a range of social, economic, and environmental phenomena. It is a set of technique for analysis, spatial layout, and human activity pattern in building an urban area. It is also a set of theory linking space and society. It is a tool for asking special questions of the city, of the form, is there is a special dimension to this or that problem, to social malaise, to migration pattern, to crime distribution, and so on. All these are areas have been investigating using space syntax theory and methodology. Space is first and foremost configurational. In other words, what's happening in any individual space, a room, corridor, street, or public spaces, is fundamentally influenced by the relationships between the space and the network of spaces to which it is connected. The space comes first, and that we should try to detect society through the space and not the other way around. That's what Hillier is saying. Hillier makes the assumption that the urban space of every city is understandable through our bodies and minds. Moving and seeing are the two ways which we do interact with the space, and therefore a system of a metric and visual distance exists. This proposal implies that the distance might not have only one meaning, and thus it does not express only the relations of one part to another, but also the relation of all parts to all others. The study begins to explore the morphology of the village's spaces and looks at the key special quality of the layout, which are of interest not only for themselves but also for their critical implications for the constructions of the route and a space to counter people movement from multi-scales and exposure to village space to use it as a part of the city's activities or movements. Here in the present here in the study, we are using the space syntax measures graphically and numerically at multi scales. Basically, it is two type of measures. It's called integrations, movement, and choice movement. Or mathematicians would say integration means closeness, or how space close to other spaces. Choice is, in mathematicians' term, it's mean between us, from origin to destinations, the trip between one part to another, how often I will be passing by. So this is basically, and the representations will be through graphic maps of these measures, as well as the quality figures numbers. All this as syntactic analysis and empirical data will be actually it's mapped in the GIS. So you have all the layers of spatial and social and economics data all aligned together. The analysis of each village's process in stages. Unfolding pictures of the generic properties of the villages within the urban system has examined, which are of interest not only for themselves but also for their critical implication for their social nature. In this study, the analysis of the village The analysis of each village progress in a stage, unfolding pictures of the generic properties of the village within the urban system has examined, which are of interest not only for themselves but also for their critical implications for their social nature. In this study, the analysis of the village exploring the generic property of the observed village system and investigating the emergent pattern of village configurations property within the urban system at different radius, from local to global. Thus, in this section, the study aimed to answer, do we find a distinctive type of space form in the village through the different radii? And if so, could this imply the way the village is integrated into the urban context? Also, the balance between the local and the global configurations, or say the local and global movement has a tendency to define the nature of observed villages. This propositions is examined in the study by asking what degree of the village layout corresponding to the global foreground network from the urban structures. Furthermore, the relationships between the local and the global properties of the villages is the second dimension of the model measures. From space syntax theory, integrations integrations movement is the first order global state measures, which is lead to the intelligibility. Sorry. Similarly to a strong movement interface between the inhabitant and stranger. Therefore, the combinations of the variant pattern of the village local space as a background network with the high degree of invariant pattern as a foreground network within the large scale of urban network. This in turn might optimally define the village nature and the way of embedding of the whole system. The key is the long linear space pattern or a deforming wheel pattern at the local scale, which are essential urban elements and enhance the ability of local system to bend with the surrounding context. Here, this is the software that we're using space syntax. It's called depth map, and what you're seeing here is the map for global integrations and showing only highlight the foreground network. In the right side, you can see the graph for all the figures numbers of each village's cities. The blue one, it's I believe in Manama, and the orange one in Muharraq villages, from radius 250 and then 500, 700, 1000, 2000 until the global radius Rn. When we say radius 500, mean like walking distance of 5 minutes. Here, showing the villages where they're with the urban context, and the urban context actually is vary and differ from one village to another based on the use. Some of them being surrounded with a private residential area like villa and houses, another with the Ministry of Housing's or let's say affordable housing projects or a housing project, a big housing project like a big town of residential and planned by the government, or it could be a new developments area with a high-rise building and mixed use, or a villages which is next to an old center or old souk, old market. Here, overall, the intelligibility of integrations map, showing only the foreground network at the global and at radius 2000, and they overlap. Where do they overlap in relation to this villages space? The villages is actually in a grayish color background. At the top left, you can see the figures for this intelligibility in comparing between Manama and Muharraq and the total model. Here also the intelligibility for choice. You can, if we zoom in a little bit, and here we're presenting in black and white, the white lines showing the foreground network. At in the left side you see local radius 500, the foreground networks for integrations, and at the right side you see the meso radius 2000 at for foreground network for integrations. You can see that actually some lines faded away from 500 to 2000, and for example, when you see one of them is like with a ringy shapes, and suddenly by moving the radius, some of them the lines faded away and become only one linear space. Here we have two examples or samples of among all these villages to show the strong embedded villages and the weak embedded villages. In the left, you will see the strong embedded villages, which is find it in Ras Rumman, and in the right, you will find the villages with a weak embedded within the context through the space syntax analysis. Also, we did observations movements for the people. Where do they move? Where they encounter? And how do they present? How do they? Where is their core presence? Or let's say the highest density of pedestrians movement. At the same time, where the to what extent they're distributing the economics activity, and where do they locate it? The analysis suggests that the villages are embedded to a different degree within the urban context. In the case of well embedded villages, the structure of the village system exposed to high potential of movement at different scale for non-residential use. The locations of high movement that remain in the same space is an essential element when it accommodates not just the edges of the village but also the inner space. The most significant pattern found in the village structure in the urban deforming wheel, the map show that the high dynamic pattern of a flow people using the space is picked out by high movement of integration and choice in the village at local radius 500 or intermediate radius 2000. The study suggests that these villages tied in different way within the surrounding urban context. Some of these villages' space layout has as objective to expand the graph of movement to generate relationships within the surrounding context, and others have a limited graph movement to spread only in the local structures of the village. Here also showing the intelligibility patterns, schematic diagrams. We notice also that the weak embedded villages within their surrounding context, they extend only one segment or two to their surrounding context to be connected with the surrounding context, while the strongest village embedded have at least between 5 to 10 segments connected to the surrounding. Some of these village space layout has as objective to expand the graph of movement to generate relationships within the surrounding context, and other have a limited graph movement to spread only in the local structure of the village. Thank you.